matter, right? But the power, of course, is in recognizing that we marginalize certain kinds of lives and we don't give them the proper respect. Of course, his challenge is we must respect our own lives first, and then we can begin to respect other lives as well. He compliments finally the Swedish philosopher Swedenborg as an amazing current mind. And then he finally finishes by pointing out that the scholar has to be three things. Independent. We'll think more about this one when we hit his essay, Self-Reliance. Has to be courageous. Has to be original. Right? This is his notion of genius. He will say it, that America is not a timid society, and that the American scholar must create a native, truly American culture. Well, let's go to work and kind of take a look at a few of these paragraphs. We'll start with paragraph 39. He says it, if there is any period one would desire to be born in, is it not the age of revolution, when the old and the new stand side by side and admit of being compared, when the energies of all men are searched by fear and by hope, when the historic glories of the old can be compensated by the rich possibilities of the new era? This time, like all times, is a very good one if we but know what to do with it. And about that, of course, I would say to you, don't listen to all of the adults who are constantly telling you how terrible this time is in American history. Of course, every generation is always going to say how terrible the time is, all the way back to the time of Plato and his critique of Athenian society. But we have to look past those criticisms and find the optimism, and that's a big part of what Emerson is challenging us to do, right? To continue, he says that, I ask not for the great, the remote, the romantic. This is paragraph 41. What is doing in Italy or Arabia? What is Greek art or provincial minstrelsy? I embrace the common. I explore and sit at the feet of the familiar, the low. Give me insight into today, and you may have the antique and future worlds. What would we really know the meaning of? It's an interesting idea. In other words, nothing is mundane. He mentions in the next line, the glance of an eye is brilliant. You'll remember Whitman says this, right, in Song of Myself, passage 48. To glance with an eye or show a bean in its pod confounds the learning of all time. Whitman, a close reader of course, this essay, we might say, right? To continue, paragraph number 44, really quickly. We've listened, he says it. And this is the end of the speech. Mr. President and gentlemen, this confidence in the unsearched might of man belongs by all motives, by all prophecy, by all preparation to the American scholar. And then this wonderful line, we've listened too long to the courtly muses of Europe. The spirit of the American freeman is already suspected to be timid, imitative, tame. He says, Europe looks at us and they see us as timid, tame. They see us as wanting to always try and be just like them. And then he will finish with this really famous set of lines at the very end. He says, we will walk on our own feet. We will work with our own hands. We will speak our own minds. Don't tell me what to do, I have said, is the mantra of American thought. And here it's articulated in powerful ways. This is an intellectual declaration of independence from all things classical, all things European. The study of letters shall be no longer a name for pity, for doubt, or for sensual indulgence. The dread of man and the love of man shall be a wall of defense and a wreath of joy around all. A nation of men will for the first time exist, because each believes himself, and of course we would say today herself. Emerson speaking, of course, only to males at Harvard when he gave this lecture. How thankfully things have changed, because each believes himself inspired by the divine soul, which also inspires all men. Well, this is compelling optimism, isn't it? And it is a suggestion that when we pick up Emerson's American Scholar, we are challenged. Let's finish now with some level 2, level 3 work. At 2A, major messages, themes, Well, we've called it before in 303 that the challenge is to be both a warrior and a scholar. What do we mean by that? Honesty, of course, and courage, yes? And in word pictures we've talked about before, we've talked about this idea, right? That if you have that thing in your neck, as we've sometimes referred to it, a word picture from a real life story of a colleague of mine who had that thing in and his wife said, "You got that thing in the neck, what's going on?" And "I don't know, I got to go to the doctor." The doctor, of course, points out, "This is serious danger for you, this is cancer. Would you like to take it out?" And the joke that we've made, that imagining that he would say, "No, leave it in. I've got 3 months to live. I always wanted to know what that's like. It's like in the movies." "No, of course. I want to take it out." And then the doctor's saying, "Well, I only ask because it's very dangerous surgery. You may lose your voice. You may lose your life." And the fear that's involved for that person as he went through that experience, it takes, of course, some courage. First, of course, though, you have to have the honesty to admit you got this thing in your neck. For some of us, it's reading. For some of us, it's writing. For some of us, it's organization. We put off and procrastinate when we shouldn't. For some of us, it's our mathematics study, our science study. Whatever that is, we have to be honest enough to admit, right, we've got this thing in our neck. But then we've got to be courageous enough to actually go about the process of extracting that thing in our neck out, going to work. Of course, the use of education as being practical, as something valuable, as something beneficial, especially to first ourselves and then to our community and to the world, right? An important idea. Finally, another major message here, as evidenced, is this idea that you learn from the past, but you're not paralyzed by the past. Too often we've assumed, well, if I don't agree with what you're saying and you're some older writer or whatever, then I'm not going to pay any attention. No. This is silliness. We want to know what the great thinkers said so that we can contest what the great thinkers thought. That's part of the grappling process. It's part of the learning process for us, right? At level 2B, not what Emerson says, but how Emerson says it, the rhetoric. Of course, notice he loves his analogies, he loves his metaphors, he loves his symbolism, right? He loves his allusions or references to other kinds of cultures and other kinds of texts. Again, he's very much a man of the world, very much a cosmopolitan man of the world, right? And then finally, notice his use of the questions. He loves to ask these questions, and in that regards, he's very much like the great teacher Socrates. And of course, Emerson would want to say that he loves the great teacher Socrates. Let's jump to level 3. How do we relate to this kind of thing? First of all, let's relate to other texts and to our own world. Of course, we can relate, first of all, from the classical perspective. Plato and the Stoics come to mind immediately, right? Our comments on Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius come to mind. The romantic, of course, referencing here, Wordsworth and Goethe's Faust, right, as being a classic example. Finally, the modern or the postmodern kinds of references. What is your favorite movie about school and about learning? A number of years ago, the great Robin Williams made the Dead Poets Society film, which elicited a whole new generation of students who became impassioned about the idea of learning again. The great teachers have always been able to inspire. Let the great works inspire you. What are the films that have inspired you? Finally, level 3B. The questions always, in the end, are about how you can relate this information to yourself. What kind of student are you? Be honest. What kind of student could you be if you would only maybe aspire to greatness? That's Emerson's challenge. Of course, this thing about the thing in your neck and ways that you can improve. What is that for you? What is the thing in your neck? And how are you going to take care of it? To admit that you've got the problem, I'm really a terrible reader. This is, of course, a form of honesty, but it's a shallow form of honesty if you don't do anything about it. Can you do a little bit better reading? Can you do a little bit better writing? A little bit better as an organizer? A little bit better with your math and your science studies? Can you be better at, for example, learning to speak and communicate? We said this is an important part of what it means to be a well-rounded student. Of course, we've pointed out in another set of lectures that story that I like to share with you about my son Michael learning to ride his bike, and of course how freaked out he was when we took those training wheels off, because of course he knew he was going to fall, and he was afraid of falling. Fear and pain are a fundamental part of learning. You'll remember in our comments on Plato's Republic, Book 7, the cave allegory, to be dragged out of the darkness of the cave into the light of the sun, we're immediately blinded. Oh, thanks very much for helping me come out into the light of the sun. Now I'm blind, thanks. No. Time, patience. He uses the word, Emerson uses the word in this essay. Patience, And then slowly your eyes begin to become accustomed to the light, and you begin to see things you didn't see before. The challenge, of course, is to overcome fear and pain, to take a risk, in other words. Well, I hope that this essay will motivate you in that regards. In our next reading from Book 5 of Harvard Classics, we're going to be working with the Divinity School Address, as it's sometimes referred to, given in 1838. This one is a very, very controversial essay. Many have said that this is Emerson at his most iconoclastic. Come back and we'll do that work. Thank you. And thank you for hanging with me. I appreciate it.